I would say my life before going to Washington was a good life. It was a privileged life, but it was a dishonest life. And I say that because I was unsure as to what I wanted to do in my life, but more importantly, I was unclear as to the type of person I wanted to be. You just want me to tell the story?
Yeah.
Or talk about it? Sure. So when I first moved to Washington, I, for all intents and purposes, was a gay man living in the closet. Nobody, I mean nobody, from my closest friends to my family had any idea. And I remember thinking several times throughout my life, but especially then as I started thinking about my career and what I wanted to do, is I had this impression in my head that if I'm myself and I'm open and an openly gay man, professional opportunities in my life will close. I'll face discrimination, I'll be passed over for opportunities, and so I was very sensitive to that. And in addition to just the feelings of denial and not wanting to disappoint anyone or upset anyone. But a few months into my time being back in DC when I was still a White House intern, I met Ryan Price, who was my roommate at the time and was also a fellow intern. And we had met because we were both looking for housing. DC is really expensive when we were roommates. And, you know, he had the complete opposite story that I had. He was someone who came out in high school and really set a good example of, you know, somebody who was open and honest and doing really great things. And we became really good friends to the point where I remember saying to him, I go, I can't believe how quick we're becoming friends. I feel like, you know, you're one of my high school buddies or one of my college buddies. And one night we were talking and he said, hey, I want to show you a video on YouTube of kind of a video of the gay rights movement thus far. And, you know, I want you to see just kind of how far we've come. But I remember watching it and being so struck and seeing, you know, these awful stories of kids committing suicide across the country and people that are tormented on a psychological level, cultural level, not just in this country but around the world. And I remember looking at Ryan and thinking at that moment, if I can't be open and honest with Ryan, who's quickly becoming one of my best friends, I'll never be honest to anybody in my life. And so it was at that moment that I said, there's a reason why I've been going to the gay bars with you, not because I'm just a good friend and I want to be your wingman, it's actually I'm gay. And that was really, really hard to say. You know, I got really emotional and it was the first time I'd ever said that out loud to anybody. And Ryan, of course, was the most sympathetic, best person to talk to because he had lived it. And, you know, from that point on, our relationship, you know, blossomed into more than just friends, and, you know, we began dating. But I credit Ryan enormously because he was there for me and inspired me to be not just one, open with myself and honest, but two, to want to be involved in the LGBT rights movement. And, you know, here I was 22 years old and I had a full-time job and I lived in a great city. And I was uncomfortable with who I was. What happens to that teenager in a rural part of America in a very religious background where they don't feel comfortable or they might be in a dangerous situation? And so that, to me, empowered me and kind of gave me the courage to want to speak out and speak up. You know, and I would go on to come out to my family and to my friends. And in any community, there are stereotypes that people of said community have to deal with. A stereotype within the gay community that I think bothers me the most is the misconception that sexuality is a choice. You know, a gay person doesn't choose their sexuality any more than a straight person is born feeling an attraction to someone from the opposite sex. And, you know, I think back to when I was a kid and, you know, in a young kid, you know, I'm talking like 6, 7, 8 years old. and I would brush my teeth and look in the mirror, and these thoughts would pop in my head. And why is this happening? Why is this happening? Stop. I'm not gay. I'm not gay. I'm not gay. I'm not gay. And you create this self-loathing about yourself because it's not normal and it's not right. And, you're a boy. You need to have girlfriends. What's wrong with you? You're a late bloomer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All this pressure that you put on yourself. And no 8-year-old would choose to have those feelings. That hurts because I think of, as a kid, being tormented by that thought. And, knowing like, I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to think this way. Please, I don't want to think this way. I don't want to think this way. And so, I just hope that people that have that misconception, that stereotype that, oh yeah, gay people are in a phase or a fad, or they're feeling this way and going that way. I think we define sexuality as this very rigid thing, and I don't think that's the case. And it's not only hurtful, but it's harmful to the people of the gay community as well. The most fulfilling project that I got to be a part of was the designation of the Stonewall National Monument in New York City. Stonewall is often considered the watershed moment for the LGBT civil rights movement in this country. And it became clear that as President Obama was designating monuments around the country, there were cultural sites in addition to natural sites that were worthy of protection. And so I was on the team that helped work with the city of New York and the local officials and the federal officials to kind of transfer that land and those deeds over to the federal government so that when the president could pick up his pen and sign it, it became law. And it was so that now the Stonewall Inn is a national monument. Diving in a little bit deeper into my office, when I was at the White House, I worked in the correspondence office, as I mentioned. And, we handled letters and greetings and, all sorts of things, proclamations, gifts. And in 2012, the president had just come out for marriage equality. It was something that he was never publicly on the record of supporting. Up until prior to the election, there was a lot of public pressure for him to do that. And we had a policy in our office that, if you requested a wedding greeting, if you were in a heterosexual couple, no problem. Adam and Jill getting married in Florida, you could write the president, we'll print out a nice certificate with a signature on it, and you can have that at your wedding. But our policy at that time was if same-sex marriage was not legal in your state, then you could not get a wedding certificate despite the fact you were legally married. And I remember I had a friend who had some friends who, again, they were from Florida. They flew to Washington, D.C., got married, 2 men, and they had requested a White House greeting. And so I had put in the request to go get that, and my boss told me, he said, sorry, Stephen, we don't do that. That's against our policy. And I remember looking at my boss at the time, and I said, I can't think of any other policy where if we disagreed with the state, the president wouldn't comment on it. If the governor of Florida was against protecting women from domestic violence, but we knew that was the right thing to do to speak out and protect these women, we would send them a letter and we would support that. How are we doing this with marriage equality? It doesn't make sense. Just because they disagree with it in the state doesn't mean that we can't send a letter. She said, sorry, Stephen, it's too political, it's out of my hands. And I remember being in her office and thinking, and saying out loud, I said, I'm really disappointed. It's sad that that's our policy. And I walked out the building, and it was like a Friday at the end of the day, and I was getting ready to go home. And about 20 minutes later, my boss called me, and she said, hey, come back to work. We're going to get it done. And I said, what? So I run back to work, and I get to her, and I go, what's the issue? She goes, well, we talked about it, and I just called over across the street, which meant to the West Wing. And she goes, you're absolutely right. It doesn't make any sense why we would pick and choose which states we're going to acknowledge a marriage. If it's acknowledged federally, we're going to acknowledge it from the White House. The policy's changed. Here's your letter. And I remember just being blown away and flabbergasted by that, because that was no small thing. And I got the letter and we gave it to them, and they were obviously ecstatic to have it. And moving forward, that was our policy. And, I had a lot of pride that, just speaking up and, despite the fact it was an uncomfortable conversation to have with my boss, it got that policy changed. And, marriage equality across the country wouldn't happen for another 3 years until 2015. So we were kind of ahead of the ball there. But it was something that, I'm still very proud of to this day.